Not the kind you shake from a pouch. The kind the flats leave on everything they take, white in particular, the way the land marks what it has tried to swallow. I had ridden out before first light to check the eastern edge of our grazing range, where the grass thins and the ground turns pale and the horses will not go willingly. I had my rifle across my knees, and my mind was on a mare that had been limping since the week before, and I was not thinking about anything much, except the way the sky was turning that particular gray that means cold before noon. I smelled the fire first, old smoke, nothing recent. I pulled up and sat still a moment, the way you do when the land gives you something you did not expect. My horse, Shunkawakan, a gray I had ridden for 11 years, a horse that knew my breath and I knew his. He had already turned his nose toward it. He knew before I did. He usually did. I rode toward it. What I found was this: the remains of a small camp, 2 days cold at least, a bedroll burned, a tin plate bent and blackened, the carcass of a small fire ringed with stones someone had taken time to arrange, told me whoever made it was not in a hurry when they started, only when they left, or were made to leave. And in the salt, at the edge of where the grass gave out entirely, something that had been left on purpose, I dismounted. She was on her side, which is the only reason she had not baked. The salt was in her hair and against her cheek, and she was dressed in the clothes of a white settler, woman, cotton printed with small flowers, torn at the shoulder. Her wrists were bound with cord that had cut into the skin, her feet were bare, and she was with child, far along, the kind of far that means weeks, not months, and across the back of her left hand someone had pressed a hot iron. Not a brand any ranch used in that territory, just a mark, just a statement. She is nothing, she belongs to no one. Leave her. I stood there, a moment. The salt flat ran out in every direction, white and featureless, and the sky above it was the color of old bone. There was no sound except my horse shifting his weight behind me, and somewhere far off, the thin cry of a hawk. I cut the cord. My name is Tatanka Iyoteke Maza. Iron-standing buffalo, in the language of the white men who mostly called me something shorter and simpler and easier for their mouths. I was 43 years old that morning. I had been the headman of our band, not a war chief, not the great Sitting Bull. I use the name only because it is mine. For 9 years, since my father passed the responsibility to me in the last winter of his life, we were a small band, 41 people, camped in the fold of a low ridge 8 miles north of where the salt flats began. We had a treaty that meant less each year. We had horses, enough. We had our way of doing things. I worked every day to maintain against the grinding pressure of the reservation agents and the army and the men who surveyed and measured and fenced. I had also had a wife, Chongtechikala. Small heart, her name meant, though she was not small in any way that mattered. She had died 4 winters past of the coughing sickness that moved through the territory and took whom it liked without asking. We had no children. That was the weight I carried. That was the thing about myself I did not speak of. I am telling you this because it matters to what happened next, and because a man my age is not who he is by accident. He is what he has survived and what he has failed to survive, and you cannot understand the one without knowing something of the other. I got her onto my horse. This was not a simple thing. She was not a small woman. Tall for a white woman, broad-shouldered, and the weight of the child made her awkward and difficult to move without hitting her. She made a sound when I lifted her, a sound I will not forget, low and involuntary, the sound of someone who has been in pain long enough that they have stopped trying to hold it in. She did not regain consciousness. I got her, across Shunkawakan's neck, belly down at first, then realized that was wrong. I got her up and sitting, and then I got up behind her and held her against me with one arm and started north. She was burning with fever. I could feel it through her clothes and mine. I rode steadily for a long time without pushing the horse. The flats are treacherous if you rush them. There are places where the salt crust breaks, and the ground beneath is soft and can swallow a leg to the knee. I knew them. I had ridden this ground since I was a boy following my father. I knew which lines to take and which to avoid, and I took my time. She stirred once, maybe 3 miles out. Her head moved against my chest, and she made a sound that might have been a word. And I said, in the English I had learned over 30 years of necessity, "Still, we are going. You are safe now." I did not know if she heard me. Head settled again. Shunkawakan kept his pace without being told. He was that kind of horse. When I rode into camp with her, there was the silence that means we are all looking and none of us know what to say. Then my cousin Makha Wingyang, Earth Woman, we called her, the best healer our band had, and a woman who had delivered every child born among us for the past 12 years. She came forward and looked at the woman I was holding and said in Lakota, "How long?" "2 days in the salt, maybe more." "And the child?" "Close." Wing looked at me for a moment, with an expression that was half assessment and half something older and more complicated. Then she said, "Bring her to my lodge." I heard the voices start behind me as I carried the woman through camp. I heard what they were saying. I had expected it. A white woman, why? The agency will come. The soldiers will come, he brings trouble on us. I did not stop walking. I want to be honest about something. I did not bring her in out of sentiment. I am not a sentimental man. I brought her in because she was a human being who had been left to die in the salt, and I was not willing to ride past that. There is a word in our language, Wachangtugnaka, which contains inside it the idea that the suffering of another person is something that happens to you as well, that you cannot be separate from it, that to turn away from it is to make yourself less. My father used that word often. It is not sentimentality. It is something closer to obligation. Also, and I want to say this plainly because it is true, and I would rather be plain than claim I was wiser than I was. I did not know who she was. I did not know what she had done, or had not done, or how she had come to be in the salt with a brand on her hand and her wrists tied. I did not know whose wife or daughter she was, or if she was anyone's wife or daughter at all. I knew only that she was alive, and that she should not have been left there, and that if I had left her, she would not have remained alive by the time the sun hit the flats full. Those two things together were enough. She was in Makaha Wengyang's lodge for 3 days before she was fully conscious. Makaha Wengyang came to me each evening and gave me a report, the way she had always given me reports on the health of the band. Direct, spare, without excess. The fever broke on the 2nd day. The child was still alive. She could hear the heartbeat with the horn she used, a smooth section of buffalo horn. She pressed against a woman's belly to listen. The burns on the woman's hand were infected, but not as badly as they might have been. The salt, ironically, had done some of the work of a dressing. She was malnourished. She was dehydrated. She would heal if nothing went wrong. "What about the child?" I asked. "The child is strong," Wing Yang said. "Stubborn. Like its mother, I think." On the 3rd morning, I was sitting outside my lodge in the early light, working through the repairs on a piece of tack that had needed attention for 2 weeks, when I heard the voice I had not yet heard. "Hello?" It came from Makaha Wingyang's lodge, maybe 20 paces away. One word. A woman's voice, careful and uncertain. The voice of someone who has just woken in a place they don't recognize and is trying to get the measure of it before they commit to anything louder. I set down the tack and walked over and crouched at the entrance. "You are awake," I said in English. A pause. "Where am I?" "Our camp, 8 miles north of the salt flats." Another pause. She was working through that. "There are. I can hear people. 41 people. You are safe." Voice caught. "My baby. Still with you." "Maka Wingyang is our healer. She says the child is strong." I heard her breathing, not crying. Exactly. But the breath of someone who has been holding something for a long time and has just been given permission to put it down. I did not go inside that first morning. It was not the right thing. She needed to gather herself without a stranger's face in front of her. I told her that Maka Wingyang would bring food and water, and that she should rest, and I went back to my tack. Her name was Putlabai. She told me this on the 5th day. when she was sitting up and eating broth and had some of her color back. She said it the way a person says a word they have been keeping close, carefully, like she was deciding whether to trust it with me. That is not a name I know, I said. It's from India. My mother was from a city called Pune. She came to America as a young woman. She married a man from Missouri. She paused. He's dead. 2 years ago, I'm sorry. Don't be. She said this without bitterness, which is its own kind of statement. He was not a good man. After he died, I tried to start again. Took work on a ranch south of here. The Callaway spread, if you know it. I knew the Callaway spread. I knew Denton Callaway, which was more information than I needed. A man who ran 8,000 acres with money he'd made in ways that left marks on people. He didn't hire me for the work, she said. She was looking at the wall of the lodge. The painted hide, the careful work of color and pattern. At first it seemed like I thought I could manage it. Keep him at a distance. I was good with horses. I thought that would be enough. She shook her head slightly. When I told him about the baby, he put the brand on my hand himself and had 2 of his men drive me to the salt flats in the middle of the night. She said this without drama, just the facts laid out in order. You describe a thing that happened, and that you have already decided you will survive. There is a kind of courage in that way of speaking that I have always respected. It does not ask for anything. It just tells the truth. I looked at her hand. Wrapped now in clean cloth, the binding Maka Wingyang changed each morning. The brand, I said. His mark. Meaning I'm ruined. That any decent person would know to turn me away. She looked at me then, directly. Her eyes were dark, darker than I expected, and steadier than they had any right to be given what she had been through. Why didn't you? I thought about that for a moment. Because you were alive, I said, and I don't follow Denton Callaway's instructions. Something shifted in her face. Not a smile, not yet. She wasn't ready for that. But something that loosened slightly, like a knot that has been pulled too tight, and someone has just worked a little slack into the cord. The child came 18 days after I found her. I know the number because I had been counting without intending to, the way you count things that matter without making a decision to track them. 18 days of her moving through camp slowly, getting her strength back, learning the shapes of things. Which lodge was whose, which children belonged to which families, which dogs were friendly, and which would bite. 18 days of Maka Wingyang watching her with the careful attention she gave to everything that needed tending. 18 days of the band watching her and making their assessments, which went in both directions. Some warming, some not. 18 days of me, 18 knowing she was there the same way you know. A fire is behind you, even when you're not looking at it. The birth was long and hard, and I stayed outside Mahaka Wingyang's lodge for most of a night. I told myself was because I was responsible for what happened in this camp and for nothing else. Inside I heard sounds that I will not describe because some things are not mine to describe. My cousin's voice, steady, low, instructing. A silence that went on too long and made me stand up from where I had been sitting. Then, a sound that has no equivalent in any language. First cry of a new person entering the world. I sat back down. A little while later, Maka Wingyang came out. She looked at me and said, in Lakota, "Girl, both well." I nodded. She studied me for a moment. My cousin had known me since we were children. She could read me the way she read the sky. She knew what the signs meant even when I did not announce them. She said, quietly and without a great deal of ceremony, "She is a good woman, Tatanka." "I know that," I said. "Good." She went back inside. "I want to tell you about the trouble. Because it came, as trouble does. Without warning, and on a morning, when things had been quiet long enough that you start to believe they will stay that way. It was 6 weeks after the child was born. The girl, Putlibai had named her Ongpatu Wi, meaning day sun, a name she had asked Maka Wingyang to help her choose. Was healthy and growing, and had the strong opinions about feeding and sleeping that a healthy child has. Putlibai had begun doing useful things in camp. She was good with horses, as she'd said, Chion, And she had a natural hand for the smoking and curing work that several of the older women did. And she had learned enough words in Lakota to manage the basic business of a day. I had been to the agency office twice during those 6 weeks, managing the paperwork that the government required of me in triplicate, rations, census, land use documentation that changed its terms every time I read it. I was used to the grinding absurdity of it. What I was not used to was what the agent said to me on the second visit, the particular tone of a man delivering a warning while pretending to deliver news. Here you've got a white woman staying with your band, Irons. They called me Irons. It was what's for a name in their offices. Woman named Putlabai, half-breed Indian from the east. She is a guest in our camp, I said. She was injured and we took her in. Calloway's been asking after her. He shuffled the papers in front of him without looking at me. Says she's a runaway. Stole from the ranch. I looked at the agent for a long moment. He was a man named Croft, not the worst of the agents I had dealt with, but far from the best. A man primarily interested in maintaining the conditions of his own employment. What did she steal, I said. He shrugged. He didn't specify. Then I don't have much to say about it. He's filed a complaint. Says he'll come get her himself if the agency won't act. I stood up from the chair I had been in. I am a large man. I had been a large man even as a young one, and 9 years of carrying the headman's responsibilities had added something to the way I occupied space that had nothing to do with size. I looked at Croft, and I said, if Denton Calloway sets foot in our camp to take a woman who is under our protection, he will learn something about what that means. Croft looked at me. He was not a stupid man, whatever else he was. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Irons. I haven't made anything, I said. Calloway made this. Put a brand on a woman and left her in the salt to die. I found her. She is under my protection. Those are the facts. Picked up my hat and walked out. I told Putlibai that evening. She was sitting by the small fire outside Makaw Wingyong's lodge. She had moved into a smaller lodge of her own 2 weeks before. A thing we'd set up between two others had required a negotiation with certain members of the band that I had handled in the way I handled most negotiations. Directly, and with the understanding that my decision was my decision. On Peitui was asleep in the cradleboard against her chest. The firelight was on Putlabai's face. And she was very still in the way she went still when she was thinking, like the stillness itself was a tool she used. I told her about Calloway's complaint. I told her what I had said to Croft. I told her what I expected to happen next. She listened without interrupting. Then she said, he'll come, probably. He has hired men. 8, maybe 10. I know them. So do I. She looked at me. I don't want people hurt on my account. That is not how I am thinking about it, I said. How are you thinking about it? I considered the question. You are in this camp, I said. You are under my protection. That is not a negotiation. Calloway comes here to take a woman who did not steal from him, who he branded and tried to murder in the salt flats. Then what happens here will be what I decide happens here. Not him, not the agency. I paused. This is my ground. She was quiet for a moment. The fire shifted, and the light moved on her face. Then she said, my mother used to say something. In Marathi, the language she grew up speaking. Translated, it means, the person who covers you in the worst weather is the person you don't forget. I did not say anything to that. I sat with it for a moment, and then I said good night and went to my lodge. But I thought about it for a long time before I slept. Calloway on Tuesday morning. I knew he was coming before I could see him. The lookout I had placed on the East Ridge since my conversation, Croft, a young man named Hokshi Chantichikala who had the best eyes in the band and the patience to use them, had ridden back at first light with the count. 12 men. Calloway and 11 others. 4 of them he recognized as the kind of men who came before trouble. They were riding at a pace that meant they expected this to be simple. I had time to think. I used it. When they rode into the edge of our camp, I was standing in the open space at the center, alone, in the way I had stood on a great number of occasions that required me to represent something larger than myself. My rifle was across my back, not in my hands. Behind me, at various distances, were 17 men of our band, distributed in the natural-looking way that, is actually the opposite of natural. Macaw Wing had taken Putlibai and the child to the lodge furthest from the entrance before dawn. And Putlibai had not argued, which was something I was grateful for. Calloway pulled up about 20 feet from me. He was younger than I had expected. 35, maybe, with the look of a man who had never been told no if by anything he couldn't buy or break. He had a good horse and expensive tack, and a hat that cost more than most men in the territory made in a month. He looked at me the way a man looks at a fence that is in his way. Irons, he said, not a greeting, just an identification. Calloway, I said, same. I've come for the woman, Putlibai. She's a theft of my property and I'll take her back. There is no theft, I said, and you know it. His jaw tightened. She left with what was mine. She left with her life. You tried to take that from her as well. I let that sit for a moment. She is under my protection. She is not leaving with you. One of the men beside him shifted his horse slightly. A small move, the kind that signals a readiness to do something that has already been decided. I did not look at him. I kept my eyes on Calloway. You're going to start a war over a half-breed woman and her bastard, Calloway said. I'm going to do what I've said, I said. Nothing more, nothing less. If you ride away now, that is the end of it. If you do not, you will learn what this camp is and what I am in it. Those are the two possibilities. A long silence. Calloway's horse moved its head, and he steadied it without looking down. He was calculating. Good. See. The arithmetic of the situation, the number of my men he could count against the number of his, and then the secondary arithmetic, which was harder to compute. The political cost of a fight here, the agency's involvement, East. The newspapers that had been paying attention to every incident in the territory for the past 3 years. I was not a famous man in the way that some chiefs of that era were famous, but I was known. The agency knew me. The fort 40 miles north knew me. I had managed our situation, precarious as it was, without giving anyone sufficient cause to move against us. Calloway knew enough to know that. His eyes moved past me, briefly, to the men positioned behind me. Then they came back. He pulled his horse around without a word, and his men followed, and they rode back the way they had come. Nobody moved until they were out of sight. Then I heard, from somewhere behind me, from the direction of the lodges, a sound that might have been called collective exhaling, and then a child's voice, and then the ordinary sounds of camp starting back up again. I stood where I was for a moment longer, looking at the place on the horizon where 12 horses had just disappeared. Then I turned around. She was standing at the edge of the lodges. She had not stayed in the far lodge after all. Macaw Wing was behind her, arms crossed, with the expression of a woman who had told someone to stay put and had not been listened to. Labai had Ong Pe Tu Wee in the cradle board against her chest, and she was looking at me with an expression I had not seen on her face before. Or maybe I had seen it in pieces separately, and this was the first time all the pieces were in the same place at the same moment. I walked toward her. When I was close enough, she said quietly, "He's gone. He's gone. He won't come back? Not soon. And when he decides he wants to try again, we will know about it before he arrives." I looked at her. "Are you all right?" "Yes." She said it the way she said most things, plainly, without excess. Then she said, "I heard what you said to him. You were supposed to be in the back lodge. I know." A pause. "I heard what you said. I did not say anything. Nothing more, nothing less," she said, repeating the phrase I had used. "That is," she stopped. She was looking at me with that steadiness she had, the dark eyes that did not look away from things. "I have never had anyone do that for me. Stand like that, mean it like that. You are in my camp," I said. "Under my protection, that is not." "I know what you'll say," she said. "That it's what you do. That it's your ground. That it isn't about me specifically." She shifted the cradleboard slightly, adjusted it against her chest. But I think it is. I think it has been for a while. Macaw Wing Yong, behind her, had gone whirled the way my cousin went still when she was pretending not to listen. I stood there for a moment on the ground of my camp, in the morning light with the smell of sage and horses and cook fire was the smell of everything I had built and held and kept. Then I said, yes, it has been. We did not make great speeches to each other. That is not the kind of people we were. What happened over the weeks that followed happened the way things happen when two people stop organizing themselves around a careful distance, gradually, and then without ceremony. She moved her lodge closer to mine, which anyone could see was not an accident. I began to find reasons to be near the fire where she worked in the evenings, and she began to not look surprised when I appeared there. Macaw Wing was insufferable about it, in the way that a woman who has been right about something cannot help being insufferable. She said nothing, because she didn't need to. Her silence said everything that needed saying. The band, my people, took their time. Some came to it faster than others. There were 3 people who I knew would never come to it at all, and I respected their position even as I made clear that it was not a position that would determine anything about my decisions. A headman leads. He does not ask permission for the things he has determined are right. He explains himself when explanation is warranted, and he listens when listening is warranted, and then he does what he has determined is right. What I had determined was right was this: Labai and Ongpetu we were family. My family, and by extension, the band's family. How long that had been true I could not have said exactly, but it was true on the morning. I found her in the salt, I think, in the way that some things are true before you know them. She asked me once about Chongtechikala. We were sitting. This was autumn now, the evenings going cold, and the light going gold and short. Outside my lodge, and Empedu was between us on a blanket, making the investigations of a healthy 3-month-old, is, to say she was investigating everything within her reach, with great seriousness and no particular success. Labai asked me about the woman in the painted scenes inside my lodge. I had painted them myself, over the years, the way our people do, the record of a life in color and line. I told her about Chongtechikala. I told her the things that are true and the things that are hard to say, that she was a good woman and a strong one, that the winters without her had been very long, that I had decided at some point in those winters that this particular kind of loss, the specific, proof, loss of being known by someone and then no longer being known, was not something I would survive again. So, I had made myself into the kind of man who did not need to survive it, which is to say, I had made myself into a smaller thing than I was. Labai listened to all of this without interrupting. When I was done, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "My mother used to say that grief is a country you carry with you. You don't leave it behind. You just learn to travel with the weight." I thought about that. "That is a good way to say it," I said. She was a wise woman. Putlabai looked at Ongpetu Wee, who had gotten hold of the edge of the blanket and was making a meal of it. I want her to know things like that. I want her to have that. She looked back at me. I want her to have what you're teaching her too. The language. The way of reading the land. All of it. She will have it, I said, because of you. I did not argue with that. I picked up the child, who released the blanket, without complaint, and redirected her investigation toward my shirt buttons, which were apparently more interesting. "She looks at you," Putlabai said. "The way she looks at the sky when there's a hawk, like you're the most interesting thing she has seen yet." I looked down at Ongpetu Wee, who was indeed looking up at me with an expression of serious inquiry that I found, I will say this plainly, remarkable. I had not expected what it would feel like to be looked at that way, like I was something solid and interesting and exactly the thing needed. "She is a good judge," I said. Putlabai laughed. It was the first time I had heard her laugh all the way. Unchecked, genuine. The sound of someone who has decided to trust a moment completely. Changed her face. It's changed something in me too. I did not laugh. I don't do that easily. But I felt something that was the quiet equivalent of it, down in the chest, where the real things live. I want to tell you about the winter, because the winter was where things settled. The first snow came early that year, the kind that surprises you in early October and coats everything white and makes the horses stand with their backs to the wind. We had prepared well, our stores were good, the firewood was stacked high, the horses were as ready as we could get them. But a hard winter is a hard winter. And in a small band, every resource is visible and every decision matters. There was a week in January. 3 days of temperatures that would kill a man in the open in a few hours, when everything contracted to the simple business of keeping everyone alive and warm. I was moving between fires, checking on the oldest members of the band, managing the horse herd, dealing with a chimney problem in one lodge that threatened to fill the whole structure with smoke. It was the kind of exhaustion that goes past tired and into that operates on its own, automatic, without the luxury of feeling. On the third night, when I came back to my lodge very late, Labai was inside. She had moved the cradle board with the sleeping child to the side of the space and made a fire and heated something. Broth, from the smell of it. And she was sitting there, with her back straight, and her expression, that particular expression she wore, when she had made a decision and was done discussing it. She said, "Sit down." I sat down. She handed me the broth. I drank it. She watched me drink it the way Makha Wingyang watched a patient. Not hovering, but attending. Present, in a way that is different from just being in the same space. When I had finished, she said, "You're doing too much. There is exactly the amount to be done. You haven't slept in 3 days. The band. The band is fed and warm. I checked." She paused. "Old Wang Bli Gleshka has enough wood. The Hecha family's fire is drawing correctly now. Chetong fixed the flue this afternoon. The horses are in the lower corral and there's enough feed for another 4 days at this temperature." She looked at me steadily. I checked. I asked the people who know. "You don't have to do all of it alone." I looked at her. "You checked. I have been watching how you manage this band for 4 months," she said. "I know who knows what. I know who can be trusted with what task. And I know that you are the reason this band is intact and fed and warm. And I know that if you run yourself into the ground, then the band loses what holds it together." She paused. "So sleep." I was too tired to argue. I lay down on the bedroll she had set out. She had thought to do that too, which I noticed. And I was asleep before I had time to think about it. I woke to the pale gray light of early morning and the sound of Ongpatui making the small sounds that meant she was awake but not yet impatient about it. Putlabai was asleep, sitting up, her head resting against the wall of the lodge, one hand resting near but not quite touching mine. The fire had burned to coals. Outside I could hear the wind had dropped. I lay there for a moment and did not move. I looked at the painted walls of my own lodge, the history of my life in colors I had chosen. I looked at the sleeping woman and the breathing child and the pale winter light coming through the smoke hole above. I thought about the word Wachangtognaka, the suffering of another person that becomes your own. I thought about my father using it. I thought about how there is another side to that word, one I had not fully considered until that moment, that the wholeness of another person, pair of them, the safety of them, that becomes your own as well. That is also inside that word. I had not known that until I needed to know it. In the spring, the agency sent a new man. His name was Harlan, and he was different from Croft in the way that a man with actual convictions is different from a man just doing a job, which is to say he was more difficult to manage, because his beliefs about what should happen in the territory were sincere, and sincerity in an agent is not necessarily the improvement it sounds like. Harlan came to the camp in April and asked to speak with me. In response, he sat in my lodge, and he looked around it with the careful attention of a man to understand something he had been told secondhand. His eyes moved over the painted walls and over the sleeping child in her cradle board and over Putlabai, Hughes, who was working on a section of harness. at the side of the lodge with the exact particular focus of someone who is listening to everything, while peering not to. Harlan asked me about Kyo's complaint. I told him what had happened, plainly and in order. He listened without interrupting. Then he said, "Mr. Calloway has a good deal of influence with the land commissioner. I know that. A man with that influence, if he decides to make a formal case, not about the woman, but about the band, about land use, about any number of things, can create a significant amount of difficulty. I know that as well." Harlan looked at me for a long moment. He was maybe 50, with the look of a man who had originally come west with a particular set of ideas about what he would do here and had been educated by experience. "You understand what I'm saying," he said. "It is not a threat. I'm telling you what I see." "I understand what you're saying," I said. "And I'm telling you what I see. I see a man who put a brand on a woman's hand and left her and her unborn child in the salt flats to die. I see that man calling it theft and expecting the agency to do his errands. I see that you are the agency and you are here in my lodge." I paused. "What I would like to know is what kind of man Harlan is." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, almost to himself, "A fair question." He stayed for 2 hours. He asked me about the band, the census, the rations, the condition of the horses, the children. He asked me about our agreements with the neighboring bands and the informal arrangements we had made with 3 white ranchers. To our north, that peace between our grazing land and theirs. He asked good questions, the kind that told me he had actually read the files before he came. Before he left, he said, "I'll tell you something off the record, Irons." He stopped at the entrance of the lodge. "Calloway's got 3 complaints open right now with the territory office. None of them are going anywhere. He's the kind of man who uses the law the way he uses everything else, to make himself bigger and other people smaller." He looked at me. "I'm not saying it's settled. I'm saying he's not as big as he thinks." After he left, Putlabai set down the harness. "He was telling the truth," she said. "I think so. Will it hold?" I thought about that. The honest answer was, for now, and maybe longer, but not forever. Because nothing holds forever in a territory that changes its terms every year. But there is a difference between what is true over years and what is true over seasons. And over seasons, we were as solid as we had ever been. "Now," I said. She nodded. She picked up the harness again. Then she said, without looking up, "I'm not leaving." I looked at her. "I know you didn't ask," she said. "I'm telling you anyway. Whatever he does, whatever the agency does, whatever the territory decides, I'm not leaving this camp." She paused. "I'm not leaving you." She said it in the plain way she said everything. No drama in it, no performance. Just a fact she was handing to me directly. I sat with it for a moment. Then I said, "Good." Was not everything I meant. It was far less than everything I meant. But it was the word I had available, and she heard what was in it, 'cause that is what she did. She heard the thing under the words, the same way she heard the health of the band, by asking the right people the right questions. She had always been able to do that with me, from early on, and I had noticed it and said nothing about it. The way you say nothing about a river you are grateful to be near. She smiled. Small, not the full laugh, but the real version, and went back to the harness. Summer. Ong Petui learned to sit up and then to pull herself forward across the blanket with a furious efficiency that made Makha Wingyang declare she would be walking by autumn. The band had its rhythms. The movement of the horses to summer pasture, the gathering work, the repairs that the winter always made necessary. Psst. I had 4 meetings with Harlan over the summer months, and they were productive in the way that meetings are productive when both people are trying to solve something rather than win something. Calloway made one more attempt in August. A letter through the agency that made vague claims about property and threatened legal action. Harlan sent back a response that I never saw the text of, but that apparently concluded the matter, because nothing followed. The last evening of that summer, the night before the first cold front that signals the turn toward autumn, I was sitting with Putlabai outside the lodge, which had become our lodge, which had happened with the same gradual certainty as everything else between us. And Petui was asleep inside, seat, exhausted herself doing her investigations of the world with her characteristic seriousness. Shh. The sky was doing what the sky does at the end of summer in that country. Going through colors that have no names in any language I know, the kind of colors that seem to mean something, though I could never say what. I have never been a man who talks about beauty much. It always seemed beside the point, like describing water while you're thirsty. But that evening I said, when I was young, my father used to say, that the sky at the end of summer was the land saying goodbye to the part of the year that grows things. Putlabai was quiet for a moment. Then she sees, and the winter? The winter is for other things, for holding what you have. She looked at the sky. Then she looked at me, the way she looked at things she had decided to know. You're good at that, she said. Holding. I thought about the word, the weight of it, the different ways it could be true. What I had held over 9 years of headman work, what I had failed to hold once, what I had been given back that I had not expected. I am learning better, I said. She leaned against my shoulder. Fate. Not with the weight of exhaustion, just with the weight of someone resting against something solid on purpose, in the way that means this is where I want to be. Her hand found mine on the ground between us and stayed there. We sat like that, while the sky went through its colors, and the camp sounds moved around us. The horses settling, a child calling to its mother somewhere across the way, the low voices of people ending a day, and the particular quality of the light said that the growing season was nearly done, and what had grown would now be held. Anpetui made a sound from inside the lodge, not distress, just the sound of a child checking that the world is still there, that the voices she knows are still near, I answered her. In Lakota, the way I always did, a low sound, not words exactly, just presence. I am here, you are safe. This is your home, she settled. Labai's hand tightened once on mine and then relaxed. The sky went on doing what the sky does, is to say, it did not care about any of us and was beautiful anyway. That is the story, mostly. The parts that matter. There are years after that, and I could tell you about them. The good years and the years that were not, the victories that cost, and the losses that taught. The way young Petui grew into a child, with her mother's steadiness and her own particular fire, the way the band survived, what the territory did to it and what the century did to it, the negotiations and the losses and the things we held. That is not the story. The story is a morning in the salt flats, and the way the white crust holds the shape of everything it has touched. The story is a woman who was left as a statement. She is nothing. She belongs to no one. Who turned out to be the kind of nothing that will not lie, down in the salt and wait to be erased. The story is a man who rode out before first light to check on a limping mare and found something else, and did what seemed right, and discovered in the doing of it that he had been incomplete in a way he had stopped expecting to remedy. The story is a child who grew up knowing her name in 3 languages. The story is what a woman looks like when she has decided to stay and has made her decision plain, and what that looks like to a man who had stopped believing. That was a thing that could happen to him. It is what it looks like to be chosen by someone who had every reason not to stay and stayed anyway. That is the story. My horse knew before I did. He usually did.